Hi, welcome back to Like Maria. Today I'm going to talk to you again about Raymond Antrobus's poem, With Birds You're Never Lonely. This is for the AQA GCSE specification. I've already done an introduction video, so this is a more detailed analysis. And it will be really useful if you're studying the cluster Worlds and Lives, which is one of the new clusters. For this analysis, I'm going to use my traditional 10 prompt analysis. So that basically, and you might want to write these words down in your notes, is I'm going to look at the title, your personal reaction to the poem, the voice, the tone, the sound, the structure of the poem, the imagery, the techniques used, the themes that are involved, and more generally about the genre of the poem and any poems that it might remind you of. So to begin with, we have With Birds You're Never Lonely. This is an interesting title since the poem starts in a coffee shop where there are no birds. As we read through the poem, we realise that this is a quotation from somebody he meets when he's away exploring the world, and it's a kind of words of wisdom from the grandfather of the woman he meets, who says, "With birds you're never lonely." So it's a kind of recognition of the power of nature to keep us company, and it's suggesting that we don't need human beings to keep us company, that we can seek company and richness from our experience in the world without humans. Now, With Birds You're Never Lonely makes us think that there is going to be some philosophical tone to this poem, that's something we're going to explore, the idea perhaps of being lonely. Okay, next point is your personal reaction to the poem. Obviously this differs with everyone. For me, I thought this was quite a charming poem. I was really interested in the idea of the hearing aid being switched on and off, and it made me go and research Antrobus and find out that he actually is deaf himself, and he writes about often his experience of the world, and it made me think about my experience of the world as a hearing person and how that might be experienced differently by someone that can't hear so well or has the ability to turn sound on and off, and how there might be some obstacles in the life of a non-hearing person or someone who doesn't hear as well as myself. And I think it really focuses here on the senses, that idea of what it is to be lonely and what it is to be hearing and be assaulted by sounds and to be in control and to perhaps search for silence sometimes. So that was my reaction. I thought it was quite a charming poem, a little bit bleak at the end, but there was interesting ideas in this poem about the experience of life. And of course this cluster is called Worlds and Lives. So the voice in this poem is very straightforward. It's in the first person. It begins in the present tense, I can't hear the barista, and then it goes into the past tense, last week I sat alone. So there's a moment where the voice is exploring their immediate surroundings, and then we go to the moment where they are reflecting on their surroundings and their travels last week. So the poem is essentially split up into two. At the end, there's a very short reference to London and the coffee shop again. So there were two locations for this poem, which the voice explores. And the poem is really basically about the personal experience of the voice. The tone, I would say, here is reflective and philosophical. It's narrative in its descriptions of what happened in the coffee shop and then what happened in the forest. But there are philosophical moments when he talks about he wondered what the trees would say, what books would they write. And there is a certain longing perhaps for a place with more colour. So there is a kind of desiring in the tone here for a better world or a better experience of the world. Okay, coming to sound, I think this is one of the areas of the poem where you really need to look carefully and look at all the different sounds. It starts off by the voice not being able to hear. It finishes with the voice hearing and listening to the woman and the sound of a human voice. So the voice in the poem has gone from not being able to hear to being able to hear and to being able to understand. There were lots of other sounds in the poem. The coffee shop sounds, the spoon slam, steam rises. That sibilance there shows the kind of aggressive nature of that activity in the coffee shop. And of course we get the sounds of the birds. They are blaring so loudly at some points. And then the forest spat the birds back. So we have these aggressive sounds of the birds, but then also when he turns off his hearing aid, he's able to control that. All sound disappeared into a silence, and he tuned in. And there's this quiet, peaceful moment where there is no sound. But he doesn't say this is an absence, it's an appreciation of the silence. But then the silence collapses and the forest comes in again. So there's these vacillations between sound, no sound, sound, no sound. And this is what I meant by the experience of this poem and what it is to appreciate hearing and to appreciate the ability to hear the world around us and experience the world around us. So do go back and underline all the sounds here and look at how sometimes they are quite aggressive, but sometimes they are quite calming. So the structure of this poem, as I've said, is in two parts. It is firstly coffee shop, it's based on location coffee shop, and then the forest. And it's structured according to the poet's thoughts as well. The poet is prompted to think about last time he sat alone, and also prompted by the book on trees, I feel. And of course there's an irony there because we are looking at the book and it's taking us forward to the trees and the treescape in the forest, but also to this image that the poet conjures up about what books would they write if they had to cut us down. So here the poem is structured by the poet's experience of the real world, but also the flights of fantasy and the flights of imagination that take off in the poet's brain. And it steers him through different thoughts, takes him back to his holiday and his explorations abroad. So while it is quite a tight structure in terms of chronologically talking about today and last week, there is also quite a strict structure in terms of the couplets. We have these stanzas organised into couplets, and it's like little episodes. Perhaps the way that the poet is hearing is kind of fragmented like this. The forest spat all the birds back, and I was jealous. The earth carried trees, their endless brown and green trunks of sturdiness. So they are kind of these moments that he is appreciating. Perhaps these small stanzas give us a sense of the fragmented nature of that. Key imagery, as I have said, are the person in the coffee shop and the poet sitting alone, one in a modern setting, one on a tree stump. The key imagery of the sounds, the different sounds in the poem. There is also key imagery of the colour of the forest. These trees are brown and green versus the greyness of the trees in London. So we have a man-made world in the coffee shop, a modern world, and then we have a natural world full of exotic, wonderful imagery that we can experience because we are listening ourselves to the poet. So it's like we are experiencing these two worlds because the poet is creating them for us and taking us through a journey of these worlds. Okay, if we're going to look at techniques here, we have very little rhyme or rhythm in this poem. I would suggest that we have some end rhyme here, endless sturdiness, and this underlines the kind of ever-present, healthy, sturdy, strong nature of the trees in the forest. We have the questions that come into our head because the poet poses them for us. He stops describing and all of a sudden creates questions for us. So he is asking us to question. And then he is giving us all this sound imagery, the switching on and off of sound to make us pause and think about the sounds in our lives. Also, another technique is this moment now versus last week this happened, and the insertion of that quote, with birds, you're never lonely. So actually using the voice of the woman at the end of the poem here. So while this isn't a heavily crafted poem, it seems very much like a genuine first person description of what was happening and what happened to him in the coffee shop the other day. There is an intimacy to it. There is some imposition of structure, rhyme, and of course word choice, particularly word choice. And at that end, we have the one line, the monostick, the gods they can't hold. And that line coming at the end there, referring to the gods, is showing that the trees in London are not able to access that. They're not able to embrace that. It's something left out on its own in the single line that those trees can't attain. And it's only the trees in the forest that can have those gods and that element of the divine with them. So in terms of themes here, I think we've got the first theme, experience of the world in sound. We've got a theme of the contrasts of the superficial and the man-made and the urban versus the ecologically sound environment and the beauty of nature. We also have these questions that the poet poses for us to be thoughtful and think about perhaps a role reversal. If we were the trees and they cut us down, what story would we tell? Can we tell a story? Can we keep people company like the birds do? The theme in this poem to me is examine your world, examine your life, and see what you're offering to the world, and look at your experience of the world. So in terms of genre there, we could say that this is a monologue. This is a person detailing their story and talking about their very own experience of the world. It reminds me of other poems where a poet pauses and thinks about the landscape. So you might have read, for example, John Burnside's History. He is walking on the beach and he looks around and it triggers thoughts about 9/11. This is a genre of poetry where often a poet's thoughts are triggered by something they experience in real life, and they set it in a familiar environment, but their flight of imagination takes them somewhere else. Okay, so that is my 10-point analysis for With Birds You're Never Lonely by Raymond Antrobus. Please like and subscribe, and I will be doing lots more of these new GCSE poems.